Imagine a criminal syndicate so powerful that they don't just, sell illicit narcotics in the shadows.
Yay.
Instead, they control the gold in your jewelry, the meat on your dinner table, and, well, the roads connecting your cities. And they're operating entirely out in the open. Good morning and welcome to this Morning Intelligence Brief. Today is April 20, 2026.
Good morning. And for the duration of today's deep dive, we are going to be adopting a very measured, objective, and strictly fact-driven approach.
Yeah, think of those classic, very serious television news broadcasts of the 1960s.
Exactly. Our commitment today is to absolute clarity. We're looking at multiple perspectives, deliberately stripping away the editorializing and the fear-mongering that so often clouds these particular issues.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is titled Central and South America: Narco-Networks, Elections, and Regional Power.
But before we outline the intelligence, we should note that today's brief is sponsored by ProWave AI.
Yes, and it's generated utilizing Stylo News. Now, Stylo News is an advanced AI-powered news application, but it is specifically the consumer-facing version of Stylo IntelOps.
Which is a critical distinction to make. I mean, Stylo IntelOps is the actual software architecture utilized right now for enterprise operations across government, military, and international business.
Right. So what that means for you, the listener, is that the intelligence you are getting today is processed through the exact same analytical tool designed to support global decision makers in real time.
Exactly. And just to provide complete transparency on our methodology here, the stack of sources we are analyzing today includes declassified style daily intelligence estimates spanning April 15 through April 20.
Along with comprehensive geopolitical outlook reports and advanced social media sentiment trackers.
Right. The Stylo News engine has aggregated and translated data across more than 20 languages. That's from over 250 distinct sources to build this assessment.
It's incredible. So, to understand the political upheaval we're tracking across the hemisphere today, we really have to first examine the shifting physical realities on the ground.
Yes. Traditional law enforcement models are essentially failing because the adversary has structurally changed. The intelligence indicates a fundamental evolution in how these syndicates operate locally.
So let's begin in Central America and look at the logistics infrastructure. In Costa Rica, the Organismo de Investigación Judicial, or OIJ, has conducted targeted raids against clandestine airstrips.
Right, and those are specifically concentrated in the Heredia province.
Exactly. And the data confirms the heavy use of Costa Rican territory, not just as a transit point, but really as a permanent aviation logistics hub for moving narcotics northward.
And as we move north into Guatemala, we are seeing an organizational evolution. Established gangs like 18th Street and MS-13 are demonstrably moving out of just strictly street-level extortion.
Right. They're moving away from just territorial violence.
Precisely. They are actively penetrating political spaces. They're funding local campaigns to secure sympathetic governance. And furthermore, our reporting confirms that Mexican cartels are actively introducing drone tactics into the Guatemalan theater.
Wait, I want to pause on that point for a second, because introducing drone warfare, that changes the calculus entirely.
It absolutely does.
We are not just talking about surveillance, are we? I mean, we are talking about weaponized payloads. They are essentially mimicking the aerial capabilities of a state military.
That is exactly what they're doing. They are utilizing commercially available drones, but they modify them to drop explosive payloads on rival encampments and even law enforcement convoys. Yeah, it provides them with an asymmetrical tactical advantage that local police forces are just simply not equipped to defend against.
It is deeply concerning. And moving south, the situation on the ground reflects a similar complexity, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
In Ecuador, criminal syndicates like Los Lobos and Los Choneros have established deeply entrenched, vertically integrated networks.
Right. Their operations now seamlessly span from urban command, strongholds in the capital, Quito, all the way to coastal export access points in the port of Pazoria.
Meanwhile, if you look at Colombia, particularly within the Amazon basin regions like Putumayo and Catatumbo armed groups, are aggressively exploiting a massive governance vacuum.
And to provide some context on that for the listener, when the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, officially demobilized in 2016, they abandoned vast swaths of jungle territory.
Right, territory they had controlled for decades. The Colombian state really struggled to fill that void, and as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. Rival factions and cartels rushed right in.
And according to the intelligence estimates, what they're doing in that vacuum is fascinating. I mean, these factions are not just exclusively smuggling cocaine anymore.
No.
They're running highly complex supply chains for physical commodities,
Wow.
specifically gold and illegally trafficked meat.
Yes, and the mechanism of this diversification is critical to understand. A cartel will purchase vast tracts of cleared Amazon land, right? And they run cattle. Then they integrate that beef into legitimate local slaughterhouses and processing plants. Suddenly, narco dollars are washed clean. They're converted into legitimate grocery store revenue.
Wow.
And the exact same mechanism applies to illegal gold mining. It's mined, melted down, and just sold directly into the global commodities market.
Okay, well, let's unpack this and synthesize it. If these cartels are utilizing weaponized drone tactics and controlling coastal export hubs and running multi-industry supply chains from cattle to gold,
Right.
aren't they operating less like traditional organized crime syndicates and more like a hostile corporate takeover of a municipality? I mean, they are operating as pseudo-states. What does that mean for local stability?
Well, that analogy is highly accurate. What is fascinating here is the underlying strategic objective. These organizations do not generally seek to march on the capital and overthrow central governments.
Right, not in a traditional insurgent sense.
Yeah. Exactly. They simply do not need to sit in the presidential palace. Their objective is to sustain just enough violence, corruption, and institutional decay to erode state legitimacy in their specific areas of operation.
They just want to own the roads and the rivers.
Precisely. So when a cartel controls the local gold mine, the regional meat supply, and the transit routes, they become the de facto governing authority.
Which fractures national stability from the inside out.
Exactly. And because these criminal networks have successfully morphed into these untouchable multinational logistics empires, traditional regional law enforcement has largely failed to contain them.
Right.
And that systemic failure is exactly what has triggered the unprecedented militarized response we are now seeing from the United States.
Which really brings us to our next major focus, U.S. military action and regional tensions. And we need to look objectively at the facts regarding these recent military strikes.
Yes, the data is quite stark.
Since September 2025, United States Southern Command has conducted over 50 military strikes on alleged drug smuggling vessels operating in the Eastern Pacific and the Caribbean Sea.
And those operations have resulted in at least 177 casualties.
Right. And the perspectives on this severe escalation are sharply divided. We must examine the reasoning of the primary decision makers involved here.
From the U.S. perspective, the Trump administration has taken an exceptionally aggressive stance. They formally designated major drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
Yes.
But crucially, they also took the unprecedented step of designating the synthetic opioid fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on that classification just to ensure we are explaining the mechanics clearly to the listener.
Go ahead.
Historically, when we talk about a weapon of mass destruction, a WMD, the international community is referring to nuclear, biological, or chemical threats designed to inflict mass casualties in a theater of war. By applying this specific legal classification to a synthetic narcotic like fentanyl, is the U.S. not essentially bypassing traditional law enforcement entirely? Like, how does that reclassification change the established rules of engagement?
Well, that is the central question because it represents a complete paradigm shift in international relations. Historically, counter-narcotics has strictly been a law enforcement mission.
Yes. Building cases, securing warrants.
Exactly. Coordinating extraditions with partner nations, arresting suspects to stand trial. It is bound by judicial due process and international policing standards.
But a WMD designation changes the entire theater of operations.
Precisely. By designating fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction and cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, the framework shifts from law enforcement to military conflict.
Wow.
Under this legal argument, the administration justifies these lethal maritime strikes as necessary, proportional acts of national self-defense against an imminent terror threat.
So it fundamentally alters the rules of engagement. It allows for preemptive, lethal military force in international waters without the traditional burden of judicial due process or host nation permission.
Yes. But we must also report the international and legal perspectives opposing this framework. Mexican legal experts, alongside numerous international human rights organizations, have strongly condemned these maritime strikes.
Right, because these actions bypass the judicial system. Critics characterize them as extrajudicial killings that lack transparent evidentiary review.
Furthermore, they argue this legal loophole actively violates the sovereignty of Latin American nations, and this friction has prompted severe diplomatic warnings.
Especially in Colombia.
Yes, Colombian President Gustavo Petro has issued a stark public statement. He warned that continued heavy-handed U.S. military pressure and the bypassing of Latin American sovereignty risks provoking a regional rebellion.
Which means a unified diplomatic or even civil uprising against United States influence. So this intense military pressure and the resulting diplomatic friction are actively reshaping the political leadership of the entire hemisphere. And the strain on these systems brings us to the recent seismic shifts in national governments.
Right, beginning with the unprecedented geopolitical shift in Venezuela. In January 2026, U.S. military forces conducted an operation resulting in the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife.
Yes, and the economic and diplomatic fallout from that single event continues to restructure regional alliances. Let's examine the immediate diplomatic ripple effects of that tutored transition.
Well, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado recently announced she will symbolically award her 2025 Nobel Peace Prize to Donald Trump.
Specifically in recognition of his administration's decisive intervention.
Exactly. And economically, the landscape is shifting just as rapidly. Peru has successfully purchased Venezuelan crude oil for the first time since 2009.
But the mechanics of this purchase are telling, right? Peru did not buy directly state to state. They utilized the multinational commodity trading firm Trafigura. So why is a middleman like Trafigura necessary in this scenario?
Well, navigating a newly opened transitional market is diplomatically sensitive and legally complex. Peru wants to diversify its energy sourcing amid global market disruptions, of course.
But they want to shield the transaction from potential geopolitical blowback while the new Venezuelan government stabilizes.
Precisely. Using a massive trading house like Trafigura provides a necessary buffer.
However, not all regional diplomacy is trending toward integration or cooperation. In fact, we are seeing critical communication architectures break down.
Yes, Ecuador has recently recalled its ambassador from Colombia.
And this diplomatic crisis stems directly from a statement made by Colombian President Gustavo Petro, who designated the former Ecuadorian Vice President Jorge Glass as a political prisoner.
Right. Ecuador viewed that statement as an unacceptable interference in its internal judicial affairs. Recalling an ambassador is a severe diplomatic escalation.
It's a massive red flag. At a time when transnational crime requires tight, cross-border intelligence sharing, neighboring governments are instead severing their direct lines of communication.
Exactly. And we must also cast our eyes toward Peru, where the national elections held earlier this week have resulted in a highly polarized runoff scheduled for June 7, 2026.
Yes, the electorate is sharply divided between two vastly different visions for the country's future.
On one side is the right-wing candidate Keiko Fujimori. She's campaigning on a platform of strict law and order, promising mass deportations of undocumented migrants, and advocating for strong pro-U.S. investment and security ties.
Right, and she faces leftist candidate Roberto Sanchez, who advocates for increased social spending, aggressive state control over natural resources, and strong support for indigenous populations.
Yes, he is explicitly pushing back against foreign corporate influence.
So if we pull the lens back, what does this all mean for you, the listener? We are tracking a U.S.-backed transition in Venezuela, a sudden diplomatic severing between Colombia and Ecuador, and a deeply fractured runoff election in Peru.
It's a lot to process.
It is. As analysts, we have to ask, is there a unifying common thread driving these seemingly distinct national events?
Well, if we connect this intelligence to the broader geopolitical picture, the common thread is the intense structural struggle between national sovereignty and the public demand for absolute security.
Right. The populations of these nations are deeply, fundamentally fatigued by cartel violence and economic instability.
So countries are fracturing internally over the best path forward. Do they align with the heavy-handed militarized security policies of the United States, as we see proposed in Peru by Fujimori, trading some degree of autonomy for stability?
Or do they resist that external pressure to protect their sovereign independence, as articulated by President Petro in Colombia and Sanchez in Peru?
Exactly. Security and sovereignty are currently acting as opposing, polarizing forces on the geopolitical chessboard. Every election and diplomatic spat we are seeing is a symptom of that underlying friction.
Which brings us to sentiment. With these political pieces firmly in place, it is vital to examine how the public is reacting, the sentiment on the ground, and what strategic movements we can anticipate next.
Yes.
In reviewing the sentiment analysis gathered from X and over 200 global media outlets, a distinct pattern emerges.
There is deep, often bitter polarization regarding the U.S. maritime strikes. The legality and the ethics of the operations are hotly debated.
But a broad, unifying viewpoint exists across almost all borders and languages, right?
Yeah.
An overwhelming exhaustion over organized crime and a desperate desire for regional stability.
People simply want to feel safe in their neighborhoods, and it is essential to note how populations cope with this prolonged geopolitical stress.
Amidst all this tension, local sentiment is heavily unified around sports. It cannot be overstated how critical these cultural anchors are for public morale.
We are seeing massive public engagement with the Copa Libertadores matches, such as the recent fixture between Alianza Lima and Cusco FC.
Yes, and furthermore, preparations for the upcoming 2026 FIFA World Cup, set to be hosted jointly by the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, are completely dominating public discourse.
The expansion of regional broadcasting rights by platforms like Disney Plus is playing a significant role in fostering cross-border cultural unity. It offers a shared experience completely separate from the political turmoil.
Based on the intelligence estimates and the stated perspectives of the decision-makers, what are the proposed courses of action we can expect to see unfold in the near term?
There are two primary trajectories our analysts are tracking. First, from Washington, there is the potential that the U.S. may expand its military operations beyond maritime interdictions in the Pacific and Caribbean.
Right.
We could see the introduction of kinetic land strikes, meaning physical, explosive military attacks via missiles or specialized ground units against cartel infrastructure deep within Latin American borders.
Which would be a massive escalation of that WMD framework.
It would. And the second trajectory concerns how Latin American nations will respond. They face a binary choice. They will either deepen their security and intelligence pacts with the U.S., inviting that intervention to combat their internal gang threats.
Or they will push back diplomatically and perhaps economically to protect their sovereignty from perceived American overreach.
Exactly.
So for our listeners, based on today's brief, here is exactly what you need to keep a close eye on in the coming weeks. First, watch the June 7th presidential runoff election in Peru, which will serve as a critical bellwether for regional alignment.
Yes.
Second, track the ongoing deployment and posture of U.S. maritime assets in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific.
Whoa.
And third, monitor any potential diplomatic fallout stemming from Colombia's warnings of a regional uprising against foreign intervention.
Right.
Okay, dropping the 1960s news anchor persona. Wow, just taking a breath here.
Yeah, that was intense.
It was, but honestly, sometimes you really need that objective, strictly the facts delivery to grasp the sheer gravity of what is happening across an entire continent.
It absolutely helps clarify the picture. You know, when you strip away the shouting on social media and just look at the raw data, the airstrips, the military strikes, the diplomatic cables, the scale of this shift is just staggering.
Yeah.
It's not just about drugs anymore. It is about who holds actual functional power on the ground.
Exactly. And I want to make sure you, our listener, know how you can track these exact same events and spot these patterns for yourself. You know, when I was prepping for this deep dive, I actually used Stylo News on my phone to track how the cartels were laundering money through the meat supply chains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's incredibly intuitive.
That's the beauty of it. It operates as your own personal intelligence agency. It pulls data from hundreds of traditional global news sources alongside real-time feeds from X and synthesizes it.
Right, and it doesn't just give you a list of links. It actually analyzes the data. Using its AI OSINT engine, it translates over 20 languages in under 60 seconds.
Which is huge.
I set up a custom watch list just for the Peruvian election and the Trafigura oil deal. And it generated an intelligence-style brief tailored exactly to what I needed to know, cutting out all the noise.
It's the exact same foundational technology used by enterprise and government decision-makers, brought directly to your desktop or mobile device. It just empowers you to be your own analyst.
Exactly. So if you want to cut through the clutter and get AI-powered news on demand, go to www.stylonews.com to subscribe. That is www.stylonews.com. Take control of your information feed.
And as we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We started this deep dive looking at how these multinational cartels are diversifying into legitimate physical commodities like meat and gold.
Right.
And we saw national armies responding with naval blockades and drone strikes. Perhaps the future of global power in the 21st century isn't dictated by who controls the presidential palace in the capital city,
Oh, okay.
but rather who ultimately controls the logistics supply chain.
That is a chilling but brilliant point. A pseudo-state built entirely on logistics and supply routes. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this morning's deep dive. We love hearing from you, so please submit your requests for future topics, and do not forget to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will see you next time.